Michael Johnson woke up early that summer morning, as he always did. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the wide fields of his family's ranch in Texas. The air was cool, the grass still wet with dew, and the faint sound of roosters echoed from a nearby farm. Michael poured himself a cup of black coffee and stepped out onto the porch. From there, he could see the land that had been in his family for generations. It wasn't just acres of soil, it was his life, his history, and his greatest pride. The ranch had been built more than 100 years ago by his grandfather, George Johnson. George had been a hard-working man who believed in honesty and sweat. He built fences with his own hands, raised cattle, and left behind not only land but also stories that carried wisdom. Michael's grandmother, Martha, had once turned this ranch into a warm home. She would bake pies that filled the air with sweetness and hum songs while hanging laundry in the wind. To Michael, their presence was still alive in every corner of the ranch. The place was full of memories. The old barn where Michael's father taught him how to saddle a horse, the white oak tree where he and his cousins used to play hide and seek, and the long dirt road that stretched toward the town, all these things reminded him that his roots were deep here. This wasn't just a property, it was a legacy. That morning, Michael decided to fix the broken wooden gate near the west pasture. With his sleeves rolled up and his hands covered in dust, he hammered each nail carefully. His loyal dog, Buddy, sat nearby, wagging its tail in the sun. For Michael, such simple work felt rewarding. But his peace was interrupted when a black car rolled up the dusty road. It was sleek, shiny, and out of place in the countryside. Michael stood up and wiped the sweat from his forehead as a woman stepped out. She was tall, dressed in a sharp gray suit, holding a leather folder in her hand. She wore expensive sunglasses and carried herself with confidence, as if she owned everything she set her eyes on. "Good morning," she said in a firm voice. "You must be Michael Johnson." "That's right," Michael replied cautiously. "Can I help you with something?" The woman extended her hand. "I'm Karen Smith, head of the local homeowners association HOA. I came to talk to you about your property." Michael raised an eyebrow. "My ranch? What about it?" Karen opened her folder and pulled out a few papers. "According to our records, this land falls under HOA jurisdiction. That means you're required to comply with community rules. Technically, this ranch now belongs to the HOA. So, in a way, it's mine to manage." Michael felt his chest tighten. He took a step closer, his voice calm but firm. "This ranch has belonged to my family for over a century. Nobody, especially not some HOA, has any claim here." Karen smiled thinly, as if she expected that answer. "Well, I've reviewed the property history, and it seems your family never registered it properly. Without that legal record, the HOA can step in and take ownership. If you don't agree, you'll face penalties. I suggest you sign these documents today." She held out a pen, as if the matter was already settled. Michael's hand gripped the hammer he had been using earlier. He didn't raise it, but the weight reminded him of his grandfather's strength. His voice sharpened. "This land was built by George Johnson with his hands. My father worked it, and now I do. No piece of paper can erase that." "You're mistaken, Miss Smith. This ranch isn't yours, and it never will be." Karen adjusted her sunglasses, unbothered by his anger. "We'll see about that. The law is on my side, and I always win." With those words, she returned to her car, leaving behind a cloud of dust as she drove away. Michael stood in silence, his heart pounding. Buddy barked at the fading car, sensing the tension. For a moment, Michael felt a wave of disbelief. Could someone truly take his family's land by claiming old paperwork? Could history and legacy be erased just like that? But deep inside, Michael knew the truth. His grandfather had kept journals. His father had left behind letters. And somewhere, in the old wooden chest inside the attic, there were papers that told the story of this ranch and its rightful ownership. Michael realized that Karen had underestimated him. She thought he was just a rancher with no proof. But what she didn't know was that Michael had a century of truth on his side. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the fields, Michael made a silent promise. He would fight for his ranch. He would dig into the past, uncover the history, and prove once and for all that this land was his family's, and no one, not even Karen with her folders and her HOA, could take it away. This was just the beginning of a battle that would test his patience, courage, and love for his heritage. And Michael was ready. The evening after Karen's visit, Michael sat on the porch with his cup of coffee untouched. Buddy, his loyal dog, lay by his feet, sensing his master's worry. Michael's mind replayed Karen's words again and again. She had spoken with such confidence, as if the ranch was already hers. But Michael knew better. His family's story was rooted deep in the soil, and no outsider could simply erase it. The problem was proof. Karen had official-looking papers, while Michael only had memories and stories passed down. If he wanted to stop her, he would need solid evidence. He thought about the attic, where old boxes and trunks had been stored for decades. His father once told him that his grandfather, George, kept careful records. Maybe those records were still up there. That night, instead of going to bed, Michael climbed the creaky wooden steps into the attic. Dust floated in the air, and the faint smell of old wood filled his nose. The space was crowded with boxes, jars, and tools that hadn't been touched in years. Cobwebs clung to corners, and the single bulb above flickered weakly. Michael moved aside an old rocking chair and found a large wooden chest with metal hinges. He knelt down, brushing away the dust. The initials G.J. were carved into the lid. His heart skipped a beat. "Grandpa George," he whispered. With a deep breath, he opened the chest. Inside were leather-bound journals, yellowed papers, and black and white photographs. His fingers trembled as he lifted the first journal. On the cover, written in faded ink, were the words, "George Johnson, 1921. Michael turned the fragile pages carefully. The handwriting was rough but clear. His grandfather had recorded daily life on the ranch, building fences, buying cattle, planting crops. Each entry was a piece of history. Then he found something even more important, a deed. The document, though old, clearly stated George Johnson's purchase of the land from a man named William Clark. The signature and date were still visible. Michael let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. This is it. But he knew it wouldn't be enough. Karen would not back down just because of one paper. He needed a trail, a record of ownership through every generation. He spent hours digging through the chest, reading letters and receipts. He found tax records from the 1940s, notes about cattle sales in the 1960s, and even a letter from a local mayor congratulating George on 30 years of ranching. As the night grew darker, Michael realized he was on the right path. The ranch wasn't just remembered by his family, it had been acknowledged by the community for decades. That meant there would be more records out there, maybe in the courthouse or the county office. He decided to visit the town the next morning. The following day, Michael drove into town in his old pickup truck. The courthouse stood tall, with its red bricks and white columns. Inside, rows of shelves and cabinets held decades of records. The clerk, an older man named David, greeted him warmly. "Michael. Haven't seen you in a while. What brings you here?" Michael explained the situation carefully, leaving out Karen's sharp tone but not the seriousness of her claim. David frowned and shook his head. "The Johnson Ranch? I've known about it my whole life. If someone's questioning it, that doesn't sound right." "Karen Smith says it's HOA property," Michael said, his jaw tightening. David chuckled. "HOA doesn't own half the land they claim. But let's see what we've got." Together, they searched through old books and records. Hours passed as pages flipped, dust rising with every movement. Finally, David pulled out a thick ledger. "Here," he said, pointing to a line. "George Johnson. Land purchased in 1921. And here's the tax record, consistent payments for decades. Your father, John Johnson, continued it after George passed. Everything is clean." Relief washed over Michael. "Can I get copies of these?" "Of course," David replied. "I'll make them official for you." Michael left the courthouse with a folder full of documents. For the first time since Karen's arrival, he felt a spark of hope. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. Karen was determined. She wouldn't give up just because he had papers. She would challenge him, perhaps even take him to court. That evening, as the sun set over the ranch, Michael placed the documents on his kitchen table. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and sat in silence. The land outside stretched wide and golden, just as it always had. He thought of his grandfather, of the sweat and effort that had built this place. "This ranch isn't just land," Michael whispered to himself. "It's proof of who we are. And I won't let anyone steal it." Buddy barked softly, as if agreeing with him. The fight had just begun, but Michael was ready. He had the first clues, the first proof of truth. Now, it was time to dig deeper, to uncover every piece of history, and to stand against Karen's claim with everything he had. And in his heart, he knew this was more than a battle for land. It was a battle for legacy, for respect, and for the memory of those who came before him. The next few days at the ranch were quiet, but Michael knew it was only the calm before the storm. He spent his mornings fixing fences and feeding cattle, but his thoughts always returned to Karen. She had left with a promise in her voice, "We'll see about that." Michael understood that she wouldn't walk away easily. Sure enough, his prediction came true. On a bright Monday morning, a letter arrived in his mailbox. The envelope bore the HOA seal. Inside was a notice, written in stiff, formal language. It claimed that Michael was trespassing on community property and demanded that he vacate the ranch within 30 days. Michael clenched the paper in his hands. Anger burned inside him, but he steadied his breath. "She's trying to scare me," he muttered. Buddy barked, as if to agree. Still, the notice was serious. If Karen had the nerve to send such a letter, she might already be preparing for something bigger, maybe even a legal fight. Michael knew he needed more than just a few documents, he needed to be fully ready. That evening, Michael drove into town to visit his longtime friend, Robert, a local lawyer. Robert was a calm, thoughtful man who had helped many families with land disputes. When Michael explained the situation, Robert listened carefully, his brow furrowed. "Michael," Robert said after a pause, "Karen's bluffing, but she's clever. HOA leaders often use fear to push people around. They count on folks not knowing the law. But you've got history on your side. If your family has paid taxes and kept records, the land is yours. Michael placed the folder of documents on Robert's desk. Robert flipped through them, nodding. "These are strong," he said. "The deed from 1921, the tax records, even letters from town officials. This is proof. But we'll need to gather more, just in case she tries to twist the story." Michael felt a little lighter. "So, you think I can win this?" Robert smiled faintly. "You're not just going to win, Michael. You're going to show her that history speaks louder than arrogance." The next morning, as if on cue, Karen arrived again. Her shiny car stopped at the gate, and she stepped out with the same confidence as before. This time, she wasn't alone. Two men in suits followed her HOA representatives. Their clipboards and stern faces made the visit feel more official. Karen waved at Michael, who was leaning on the fence. "Mr. Johnson," she said in a voice that carried across the field, "we've given you notice. This land is under HOA jurisdiction. You're required to comply." Michael folded his arms. "And I've got proof this ranch belongs to my family. My grandfather bought it in 1921. I have the deed, the tax records, everything." Karen tilted her head and gave a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Paper can be forged. Records can be incomplete. My team has researched this, and from what I see, your claim is weak. Why not save yourself the trouble and hand it over peacefully? You can even stay here under HOA rules, as a tenant." Michael's jaw tightened. "This isn't just land to me. This is my family's blood and sweat. You don't scare me, Karen. And I won't let you erase 100 years of truth." Her smile faded slightly. The men with her scribbled notes, their eyes moving between Michael and the ranch. Karen closed her folder with a snap. "Very well," she said coolly. "If you want to make this difficult, we'll see each other in court." As her car drove away, Michael's heart pounded. The fight was no longer a quiet argument at the fence, it was now a legal battle. He knew she would use every tactic to intimidate him. But Michael wasn't alone. He had Robert by his side, and he had history backing him up. That night, Michael sat in his kitchen, staring at the folder of papers spread across the table. He picked up one of his grandfather's journals and read an entry from 1922, "Today, I repaired the south fence. This land is mine, and I will keep it strong for the family." Michael smiled faintly, tears pressing at the corners of his eyes. His grandfather's words felt like a voice from the past, reminding him of his duty. In the days that followed, Michael and Robert worked tirelessly. They visited the library, dug into archives, and spoke with townsfolk who remembered stories of the Johnson Ranch. An elderly woman named Linda, who had lived in the area her whole life, recalled visiting the ranch as a child. "Your grandmother gave me apple pie under that oak tree," she told Michael warmly. Everyone knew this was the Johnson place. "Always has been." Her words filled Michael with strength. The community remembered, and their memories were another kind of proof, one that Karen couldn't erase. Still, the pressure was heavy. Karen began spreading rumors in town, claiming that Michael's family had squatted on the land for decades. Some neighbors grew uneasy, unsure of what to believe. Michael heard whispers at the feed store and the diner. But he held his head high, reminding himself of the truth. Each night, as the sun set over the wide fields, Michael stood on his porch with Buddy at his side. He looked out at the land, golden and endless, and whispered, "I won't let her win." The storm had arrived, and the battle had begun. Michael knew the days ahead would test him, but his heart was steady. He had his grandfather's words, his father's hard work, and the weight of history guiding him. And deep inside, he felt certain, the truth would shine, no matter how hard Karen tried to cover it. The day of the first court hearing arrived sooner than Michael expected. For weeks, he had been preparing with Robert, gathering every paper, every photograph, and every testimony they could find. The folder on Robert's desk had grown thicker each day, filled with the weight of history. But even with all this preparation, Michael felt a knot in his stomach as he stepped into the courthouse. The old building smelled faintly of polished wood and paper. Its high ceilings and wide windows made the place feel serious, almost heavy with judgment. Michael walked beside Robert, his boots echoing on the marble floor. He had faced storms, wild animals, and long nights of work, but this was different. This was about words, laws, and arguments, and Karen seemed to be playing a game she knew well. Karen was already inside, sitting at the front with her two lawyers. She wore a sharp navy suit and held herself with confidence. When she saw Michael, she gave a polite smile that carried no warmth. Her lawyers whispered to her, their eyes sharp and calculating. The judge, an older man named Judge Harris, entered the room. Everyone rose. His calm, steady presence filled the room, and Michael felt a small measure of relief. Judge Harris had lived in the county for years, he wasn't someone easily fooled. The case began with Karen's lawyer standing up first. Your Honor, he said smoothly, the Homeowners Association has every right to claim this land. The Johnson Ranch has no official record of ownership beyond outdated and incomplete documents. Without modern registration, the land defaults to community management. Michael clenched his fists. The lawyer's words were delivered with such confidence, as if truth didn't matter. He glanced at Karen, who sat with her arms crossed, her expression calm but triumphant. Then it was Robert's turn. He rose slowly, adjusting his glasses, and spoke with quiet strength. Your Honor, this ranch has been in the Johnson family for over a century. We have deeds, tax records, journals, and testimony from community members. The HOA's claim is built on assumptions, not facts. History is clear, the land belongs to the Johnsons. He placed the folder on the table and slid several documents toward the judge. Judge Harris picked them up, scanning them with careful eyes. He nodded but said nothing. The first witness was called. It was Linda, the elderly woman who remembered visiting the ranch as a child. She walked slowly to the stand, leaning on her cane. When asked if she recognized the Johnson Ranch, her eyes lit up. Of course, she said warmly. I grew up nearby. Martha Johnson gave me pie under that oak tree. Everyone knew it was their land. It was never in question. Karen's lawyer tried to challenge her. Ma'am, memories can fade. Are you certain you're not mistaken? Linda smiled kindly. Son, I may forget my keys, but I will never forget the Johnson Ranch. It has always belonged to that family. Her words brought a small smile to Michael's face. Next came the documents. Robert carefully presented the deed from 1921, signed by William Clark and George Johnson. He showed decades of tax payments, official stamps, and even letters from town leaders congratulating the Johnson family on their success. Each piece of evidence added weight to the truth. Karen's lawyers pushed back. They argued that the papers were too old, that records might have been tampered with, and that modern systems did not recognize such documents without updated registration. Finally, Karen herself took the stand. She spoke with practiced charm, claiming she only wanted fair use of community property. She insisted that she had no personal interest, only a duty to protect community rights. But Michael knew better. He could hear the sharp edge behind her smooth words. She wasn't protecting anyone, she wanted control. When Robert questioned her, he asked simply, "Miss Smith, have you ever lived near the Johnson Ranch?" Karen hesitated. "No." "Have you ever worked the land, paid the taxes, or cared for it in any way?" Again, her answer was, "No." Robert paused, then looked at the judge. "Your Honor, my client has lived on this ranch his entire life. His father before him, and his grandfather before that. The Johnsons didn't just own the land on paper, they lived it, built it, and shared it with their community. That is something no HOA claim can erase." The courtroom grew quiet. Judge Harris leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. The hearing ended without a decision that day. The judge explained that he needed time to review all documents and testimonies carefully. Karen left the courtroom with her lawyers, her expression unreadable. Michael walked out beside Robert, the knot in his stomach loosening just a little. Outside, the sun was setting over the courthouse steps. Michael looked up at the sky, the same sky that stretched over his ranch. He felt tired but hopeful. "This is far from over," Robert said quietly. Michael nodded. "I know. But the truth is on our side. And truth doesn't fade." As they walked toward the truck, Michael thought of his grandfather's journal, of the oak tree, of every sunrise he had seen on the ranch. Karen might have the sharpest lawyers and the boldest words, but he had something stronger, the weight of 100 years of truth. And in the silence of that moment, he made a promise to himself: no matter how long the battle lasted, he would not give up. The courthouse battle had ended without a final decision, but Michael knew Karen wasn't the kind of person to sit quietly and wait. She was determined, and determined people often played dirty. In the days that followed, Michael noticed changes. First, a group of strangers showed up near his fence line, holding clipboards and taking pictures. They didn't talk to him, but it was clear they were connected to the HOA. Then, a notice appeared on his gate, claiming he was violating community rules by keeping livestock without permission. Michael tore the paper down and crumpled it in his hands. "This is nonsense," he muttered. Buddy barked, pacing beside him, sensing his frustration. Later that evening, he drove into town to buy feed. At the store, he overheard two neighbors whispering. One said, "I heard the HOA is taking over the Johnson Ranch." The other replied, "Maybe Michael was never the real owner." The word stung. Michael had lived in that community his whole life, helping neighbors during storms, sharing food during hard winters, and opening his ranch for town gatherings. To think that Karen's lies were spreading made his chest heavy. When he got home, he sat at the kitchen table with Robert. The lawyer looked over the new notices and shook his head. "Karen's trying to pressure you. She knows she's losing in court, so she's turning to tricks outside of it. She wants to break your spirit before the judge makes a ruling." Michael sighed. "She's already turning the neighbors against me." Robert leaned forward. "Then we fight back. Not with anger, but with truth. The more she pushes, the more we show who we are. You've got history, you've got evidence, and you've got the respect of people who truly know this land." The next morning, Michael went back to the attic. He searched through more boxes, determined to find anything else that could strengthen his case. After hours of digging, he came across a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were written by his grandmother, Martha, to her sister. One letter caught his eye. Dated in 1935, it said, "George is so proud of the ranch. The county assessor visited yesterday, and everything was confirmed under his name. This land will stay in our family forever." Michael's heart raced as he held the fragile paper. Another piece of truth, clear, simple, undeniable. But even as hope grew, so did Karen's tactics. A week later, Michael returned home from town to find a for sale sign planted near his driveway. His blood boiled. He yanked the sign out of the ground and threw it aside. She was trying to make it look as if the ranch was already hers to sell. That evening, Robert came by again. "She's pushing hard," Robert said, tapping the table. "But this could actually work against her. Judges don't like bullying. If she keeps this up, it'll show she's not acting in good faith." Michael nodded, though the weight on his shoulders grew heavier. He walked out onto the porch and looked at the land stretching into the horizon. The fields were golden in the fading sunlight, the barn standing strong, the oak tree tall and unmoving. "This land isn't just mine," he whispered. "It belongs to everyone who came before me. And I won't let her scare me away." The next day, Michael decided to confront the whispers head-on. At the town diner, he stood up and addressed the small crowd. His voice was steady but filled with emotion. "Some of you may have heard that the HOA is taking my ranch. That's not true. My grandfather bought that land in 1921. My family has paid taxes, cared for it, and built our lives on it for over 100 years. I'm not asking for pity, I'm asking you to remember the truth you've all seen with your own eyes." The room grew quiet. Some nodded in support, others looked uncertain, but his words planted seeds. He didn't expect everyone to believe him right away, but he knew the truth had power when spoken openly. Meanwhile, Karen grew more frustrated. Her letters became harsher, her demands bolder. She even tried sending contractors to inspect the ranch, claiming it was HOA property. Michael turned them away, standing tall at the gate with Buddy barking at his side. Every night, he felt the weight of the fight pressing down, but every morning, he rose with determination. He reread his grandfather's journals, his grandmother's letters, and the official records Robert had gathered. Each word reminded him of his duty. The land outside remained unchanged, quiet, steady, faithful. The ranch was more than fences and fields, it was a symbol of resilience. And Michael realized that Karen's tricks, though sharp, could never erase what was written in history. The storm was growing stronger, but Michael stood firm. The truth was his anchor, and no lie could pull him away from it. As the court date for the final hearing drew closer, Michael knew one thing for certain: Karen had underestimated him. She thought she could frighten him into surrender. But all she had done was light a fire in his heart, a fire that would carry him through the battle ahead. The morning of the final hearing arrived with a heavy sky. Gray clouds stretched across the horizon, and a cool wind swept over the Johnson Ranch. Michael stood on his porch, sipping coffee that tasted more bitter than usual. Buddy lay at his feet, watching him quietly, as if sensing the weight of the day. For weeks, Michael and Robert had prepared. They had documents, journals, letters, tax records, and even witnesses from the community. But Michael knew Karen wouldn't walk into court without her own strategies. She was sharp, and she was willing to twist anything to get her way. As he drove into town in his old pickup truck, the fields blurred past his window. He thought of his grandfather George and his father John, of all the days they had walked the same land, worked the same soil. Today, their legacy rested in his hands. The courthouse was busier than before. Word of the case had spread, and many townsfolk had come to watch. Some sat quietly in the wooden benches, while others whispered about what might happen. Michael felt their eyes on him as he walked inside, but he kept his head high. Karen was already seated with her lawyers at the front. She wore a crisp black suit this time, her hair neatly tied back. Her expression was calm, almost smug, as if she had already won. When her eyes met Michael's, she gave him a small smile that carried the weight of challenge. Judge Harris entered, and the room fell silent. His steady voice echoed as he began. This court will now hear final arguments regarding the Johnson Ranch dispute. Karen's lawyer was the first to speak. He stood tall, his voice smooth and confident. Your Honor, the Johnson family's claim is built on outdated records and personal memories. There is no modern registration, no clear proof under today's system. The HOA, however, provides organization, order, and lawful oversight. Without updated ownership, the land defaults to community management. The Johnson Ranch is not validly theirs. Michael's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He knew Robert would speak soon. Karen's lawyer continued, waving a stack of papers. We also submit evidence that Mr. Johnson has failed to comply with community rules. He has livestock without permits, structures that don't meet codes, and fencing that violates HOA standards. These are clear signs he does not respect modern law. Some in the audience murmured, but Judge Harris raised a hand for silence. Now it was Robert's turn. He rose slowly, adjusting his glasses, and placed his hand on the thick folder before him. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. Your Honor, the Johnson Ranch is not a matter of vague memories. It is a matter of history. We have the original deed from 1921, signed and witnessed. We have continuous tax records paid every single year for over a century. We have letters from town officials, journals from George Johnson, and testimony from lifelong residents. The HOA cannot erase 100 years of truth with a few technical claims. He handed several documents to the judge. The courtroom grew quiet as Judge Harris examined them carefully. Robert went on. The HOA claims Mr. Johnson violated rules. But this ranch predates the HOA by decades. You cannot hold land to rules created long after it was built. The Johnson family has lived with honesty, hard work, and contribution to this community. That is the law of heritage, stronger than any rule written on paper. The judge nodded thoughtfully. Then Robert called Michael to the stand. Michael walked forward, his boots echoing on the floor. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Robert asked gently, Michael, what does this ranch mean to you? Michael took a deep breath. It means everything. My grandfather built it with his hands. My father kept it alive through storms and droughts. I grew up here, worked here, and I've given my life to it. This land isn't just dirt and fences. It's family. It's history. It's who we are. His voice trembled slightly, but his eyes were steady. I'm not fighting just for myself. I'm fighting for every Johnson who came before me. This ranch is proof of their work, their sacrifice, and their love. And I won't let that be erased. The courtroom was silent. Even those who had doubted him now listened with respect. When Karen's lawyer cross-examined, he tried to trip Michael with questions. Mr. Johnson, do you have updated registration under the current system? No, Michael admitted. Then isn't it true the HOA has a valid claim? Michael looked him in the eye. No. Because laws don't erase truth. My family owned this land before the HOA existed. We paid our taxes, we cared for it, and the whole community knows it. That can't be undone. Some people in the audience nodded quietly. Finally, Karen herself was called. She spoke smoothly, claiming again that she only wanted fair use of community property. She painted Michael as stubborn, unwilling to accept rules that everyone else followed. But when Robert asked her a simple question, "Have you ever set foot on the Johnson Ranch before this dispute?" she hesitated. The silence in that pause spoke louder than her eventual answer, "No." The hearing ended with Judge Harris saying he would review everything carefully before making his decision. His face was unreadable, but Michael felt a small spark of hope. As the court adjourned, Karen swept out with her lawyers, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Michael walked out slowly, his shoulders heavy but his heart steady. Outside, the gray clouds had begun to break, and beams of sunlight fell across the courthouse steps. Michael stood there for a long moment, looking at the sky. The fight was not over, but the truth had been spoken. The final judgment was coming, and Michael believed deep down that history would not fail him. The courthouse was quieter than usual that morning. Michael arrived early, his boots clicking softly against the marble floor. The sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long patterns on the floor. Today was the day of the final verdict. The day that would decide whether the Johnson Ranch remained in Michael's family or if Karen Smith would claim it. Michael carried himself with quiet determination. He had spent weeks preparing, gathering documents, letters, and testimonies from neighbors who remembered the ranch's history. His grandfather George, his father John, and grandmother Martha's legacy rested in his hands. He couldn't let it slip away. Karen arrived soon after, her sharp black suit perfectly pressed. She walked in with her lawyers, her face calm but her eyes sharp. She had spent weeks trying to sway opinions, sending letters, and spreading rumors. She believed her confident words and shiny papers could erase 100 years of truth. Judge Harris entered the courtroom, his steps measured and his expression unreadable. Everyone rose as he took his seat. After the formalities, he spoke. "This court has reviewed all documents, heard witnesses, and considered arguments from both sides. Today, I will deliver my decision regarding the Johnson Ranch dispute." A hush fell over the courtroom. Michael felt his heart beat faster. Beside him, Robert rested a hand on his shoulder, giving a small, reassuring squeeze. Judge Harris continued, his voice steady. "The evidence shows that the Johnson family has continuously owned, maintained, and paid taxes on this property since 1921. Documents, tax records, journals, and testimonies from lifelong residents confirm their ownership. While the HOA has administrative authority over properties within certain communities, this ranch predates the HOA by decades. It is clear that the Johnsons' claim is legitimate." Michael exhaled slowly, barely able to believe what he was hearing. Karen's expression remained composed, but her hands tightened around her folder. "The claim of the HOA," the judge went on, "is based on incomplete records and assumptions. Attempts to pressure the Johnson family with notices and threats are noted and will not influence the rightful ownership of this land. Therefore, the Johnson family retains full ownership of the ranch. All HOA claims are dismissed." A wave of relief washed over Michael. His chest felt lighter, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to smile. He looked around at the townspeople who had come to watch. Many were nodding, their expressions filled with respect and admiration. Karen stood slowly, her face calm but her eyes betraying a flash of frustration. She gathered her papers but said nothing. She had lost, and there was no way to deny it. Michael stepped forward, his hands steady. "Your Honor, thank you," he said quietly. This ranch isn't just land. It's family, history, and community. I promise to continue caring for it, just as my grandfather and father did. Judge Harris nodded, a small smile crossing his face. It's good to see someone honor the past while protecting the future. This ranch belongs to the Johnson family. Court dismissed. Outside the courthouse, the sun had fully broken through the clouds. Golden light spilled across the streets, reflecting the warmth Michael felt inside. Buddy barked happily, sensing the joy of the moment. Michael climbed into his truck, feeling the familiar rumble beneath him, and started the drive back to the ranch. When he arrived, he stepped onto the wide porch and looked at the fields stretching into the distance. Horses grazed, the barn stood tall and proud, and the old oak tree swayed gently in the breeze. Everything was just as it should be. Michael's thoughts went back to his grandfather George and grandmother Martha. Their dedication, their sweat, and their love for this land had carried through generations. Today, that legacy had been honored and protected. Neighbors began to arrive, congratulating Michael and sharing words of encouragement. Linda, the elderly woman who had testified earlier, hugged him warmly. I knew truth would win, she said, smiling. The land has always belonged to the Johnsons. Michael felt tears prick his eyes. It wasn't just about winning the land, it was about justice, respect, and the triumph of truth over lies. Karen had tried to take it, using threats and tricks, but she had underestimated the power of history, community, and honesty. That evening, Michael sat on the porch with Buddy at his feet. The sky was painted with shades of orange and gold, and the ranch felt alive with peace. He looked out across the fields and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa. This ranch is ours. Your hard work wasn't wasted. Your love for this land lives on." For the first time in weeks, Michael felt fully free from fear and worry. The battle had been long and difficult, but the truth had prevailed. Karen had been shut down, not through anger or force, but through evidence, courage, and determination. And as the sun set over the Johnson Ranch, Michael realized something important: land was more than soil, fences, and barns. It was a living memory of generations who had cared for it, loved it, and fought to protect it. That was something no paper, no HOA, and no false claim could ever take away. The ranch was safe. History was honored. And Michael knew that, no matter what challenges came in the future, he had the strength to face them. This was more than a victory, it was a testament to truth, family, and the enduring power of love for one's home. Michael smiled, taking a deep breath of the fresh, open air. Buddy wagged his tail, and together they looked out over the golden fields. The Johnson Ranch, finally and forever, was theirs.